Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something round, red, and, according to a lot of 18th century Europeans, absolutely terrifying. Imagine this: you're strolling through a perfectly pruned aristocratic garden and you spot it, a tomato. Plump, gleaming like a polished ruby, hanging innocently from a vine. You reach out to touch it, maybe even pluck it. But someone gasps. "Don't," they whisper, "it's dangerous." Yes, tonight we're talking about the boring, yet oddly dramatic history of why so many well-dressed, powdered wig-wearing Europeans were suspicious of this poor fruit. You probably won't survive this. If you're a nobleman in 1765 and someone just served you a tomato salad on pewter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere cozy tonight, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start in Spain, or maybe Portugal. You're a curious little tomato, plucked from your vine somewhere in Central or South America, carried across the Atlantic in the arms of conquistadors or curious traders. It's the 16th century, and the New World has just been cracked open like a questionable oyster. Europeans are poking around, discovering chocolate, chili peppers, and yes, you, the tomato. You're not feared just yet. In fact, people are rather enchanted. But in a "look at that, what a strange little plant" kind of way, a novelty really. You're exotic, pretty, vibrant. You end up in botanical gardens, labeled with long Latin names as if you're more of a science project than a snack. Back then, tomatoes weren't the plump supermarket globes we know today. They were often yellow, sometimes purple, occasionally misshapen. In Italy, they called you pomodoro, golden apple. In French, pomme d'amour, the love apple. Romantic, right? But suspiciously romantic, and we all know that in Europe, if something looks too exciting, it's probably evil. Historians still argue whether early European tomato varieties were simply too bitter to eat, or whether the aversion was purely psychological. Either way, the tomato's debut wasn't on a dinner plate, it was in a display pot, maybe perched on a nobleman's windowsill next to his prized tulips. You're kept outside, looked at with curiosity and caution, much like a particularly stylish snake. Now you might wonder, if the tomato was so interesting, why wasn't it gobbled up like every other new food? Potatoes got adopted fairly quickly, corn, boom, staple. Even tobacco had everyone puffing away before you could say addictive carcinogen. But the tomato, you sat in your pot, growing ever redder and lonelier. There are letters and journals from the time where people note your beauty, your strangeness, and your dangerous resemblance to things that should not be eaten. Like nightshade, like mandrake root, like that thing Aunt Eleanor boiled into a potion that killed her husband. You weren't so much a food as a potential murder weapon with flair. And so you remain a wallflower at the European garden party. You do hear whispers, though, in kitchens. From the braver servants, some of them have eaten you, maybe in secret, boiled down into sauces, slipped into stews. One cook even tried frying you with olive oil and herbs. He didn't die, but when he later caught a cold, the tomato got blamed anyway. Still, you wait. And while you wait, more rumors begin to stick to you like breadcrumbs to a cutlet. One English gardener writes that his tomatoes attract an unusual number of cats. Someone else claims the juice makes your skin peel. And of course, someone insists it's an aphrodisiac. Because what else would a fruit with that much color and juice be good for? Your moment in the spotlight is delayed, but you're here now, in Europe, rooted literally in the soil, and while no one quite trusts you, no one's tossing you back on the boat either. That must count for something. Tomatoes for now are novelty plants, decorative curiosities, conversation starters in rich people's gardens. And like all shiny new things, you live somewhere between science and suspicion. By the end of the 17th century, wealthy households have you in their gardens, but not in their kitchens. You're admired, but only from a distance. Like a fancy weapon on the wall. Or an uncle who went bankrupt in the colonies? Pleasant to look at, terrible to touch. In a few Italian towns, whispers begin. Someone made a sauce, a real one, for pasta, and nobody died. But that's a tale for later. For now, you sit, you ripen, you exist. You sit there, innocent and juicy, and somehow you've become a threat. Not a snake, not a sword, just a tomato. And yet, in 18th century Europe, people start whispering that you're no ordinary fruit. You're the devil's apple. It starts subtly. Someone sees a tomato growing a little too fast. Someone else notices how red it is. Too red, if we're being honest. And in a world where color still carries suspicion, if green bile means illness, what does crimson juice mean? Your ripe glow is almost indecent. Superstition is the seasoning of everyday life now. It's a time when people still bury hair in their walls to ward off witches. When a thunderstorm makes the whole town think the end is near. So when someone eats a tomato and gets a stomachache hours later, guess what gets blamed? You, of course, not the undercooked lamb, not the warm ale. You. Stories begin to circulate. Someone died after eating a tomato. Another man went blind. A lady fainted in the garden just standing near one. Are these stories true? Historians still argue whether any of these incidents were actually caused by tomatoes, or whether people just enjoyed a little fruit-based drama. In some towns, you're associated with witches. Red fruits are already seen as suspicious. Apples have long been the star in fairy tales gone wrong. Now imagine something that looks like a red apple but isn't one. A plant that shares traits with deadly nightshade and grows fast, like magic. And you expect people not to freak out? Tomatoes are lumped in with other New World oddities like chili peppers and tobacco. But at least with those, people can see the appeal. They feel spicy or smoky or addictive. You just sit there, bland and less cooked, leaking weird juice, looking far too shiny to be safe. The whispers shift from suspicion to something more intense. Moral panic. Some religious figures even hint, quietly, carefully, that eating tomatoes might inflame the passions. Now, no one explains what exactly that means, but in 18th century euphemism, that's usually code for sinful thoughts and behavior. You are now both poison and temptation. And so begins the tomato dilemma. Admired in art, feared in the stomach. People paint you, they sketch you. They even make porcelain versions to decorate the table. Just never the real thing. The real thing is dangerous. The real thing might get you cursed. One farmer reportedly swears his goat became unruly after eating a tomato. Another says his chickens laid blood-spotted eggs. Are these reliable sources? No. But are they repeated at dinner parties? Absolutely. And don't forget, this is a time when even the sun is a bit suspicious. People stay pale on purpose to show they don't work outside. So if something's growing in full sunlight, soaking it up, getting redder and bolder each day, that's unsettling. It's almost like you enjoy it. You begin to collect nicknames: love apple, devil fruit, poison berry. They sound like perfume names now, but back then, not so charming. In some regions of France, housewives are warned not to grow tomatoes too close to their herbs, lest they turn the rosemary sour. In Germany, someone decides that too many tomato vines in one place attract ghosts. Italy's a little more relaxed, but we'll get to them. Back in the drawing rooms and parlor gardens of England and France, people continue to be enchanted and horrified. You're part plant, part scandal. You've become the kind of thing people love to talk about, but only in the abstract. Ah yes, the tomato, they say, sipping their tea and dabbing their powdered cheeks. Frightfully exotic. And then someone says they tried one once, just a nibble, and it made them feel strange. Of course, it wasn't the tomato. It was the gin. But no one blames gin. As you can imagine, your reputation doesn't improve. People begin to include you in folk cures, not because they understand you, but because you seem like the sort of thing that should either heal you or kill you. Nothing in between. One midwife recommends rubbing tomato pulp on swollen joints. A barber surgeon suggests tomato juice to counteract melancholia, and a widow in Wales is rumored to have cured her migraines by sleeping with a tomato under her pillow. Whether these stories are satire, misunderstanding, or just good gossip, they add to your mystique. You, dear tomato, are now living rent-free in the minds of 18th-century Europeans. As some admire your glossy skin, others claim it hides a corrupt interior. Some think you're harmless, some think you're cursed. And the worst part, none of them have actually eaten you. You remain untouched, feared, loved, misunderstood, like a spicy celebrity fruit just trying to live its life. But don't worry, your day will come. You're sitting quietly on a vine, still glowing with that suspicious red sheen, and suddenly, you're in the middle of a scandal. Not a war, not a rebellion, but something far more absurd. Someone has eaten you and blamed you for what came next. You see, every few years, a bold soul decides to challenge the tomato taboo. Maybe it's a hungry apprentice, a brave street cook, or just someone who's had a little too much wine and thinks, what's the worst that could happen? So they eat you. And they don't immediately drop dead. But then, maybe a stomach cramp an hour later, or a rash, or a bad dream, and just like that, your bad PR campaign gets stronger. One particularly dramatic case involved a gentleman in southern France who reportedly fell into a stupor after eating a tomato. Later analysis revealed he had also consumed several oysters, 3 glasses of port, and a questionable cheese. But of course, the tomato got blamed. Naturally. Historians still argue whether these stories were fueled by coincidence, a lack of refrigeration, or just the irresistible urge to demonize the unknown. After all, tomatoes weren't the only suspicious foods at the time. Mushrooms were feared too, but at least they had the decency to look like poison. Tomatoes, on the other hand, look delicious. That's what made them worse. You're attractive in a world that mistrusts beauty. You seem sweet and juicy, and yet, you're hiding something, aren't you? People just know it. So the court of public opinion puts you on trial. No gavel, no powdered wig, no official charges, just rumors, regrets, and whispers behind closed kitchen doors. In Italy, a cook adds a tomato to a fish stew and serves it to a nobleman. The nobleman survives, but complains that he felt a curious heat behind his eyes the next morning. Maybe it's love, maybe it's paprika, or maybe, according to him, it's the tomato plotting from within. In England, a physician named John Hill, yes, that's a real historical figure, writes that eating too many tomatoes could cause cancer. No proof, of course, just vibes. The tomato is guilty until proven innocent, and no one's really interested in a retrial. You get compared to belladonna, to mandrake, even to wolves thanks to your genus name, Solanum lycopersicum. That last bit? It literally means wolf peach, which, depending on who you ask, is either a delicious-sounding snack or the worst fruit in a children's fairy tale. And yet, not everyone buys into the hysteria. Some people see through the fear. A few adventurous eaters, travelers, botanists, cooks begin to question the verdict. They think, maybe this thing isn't cursed, they just don't say it too loudly. But those who dare to taste you usually do it quietly, in private, like a forbidden fruit or a guilty pleasure. Meanwhile, local rumors keep adding fuel to the fire. In a village in Austria, it's said that a young man who courted 3 sisters was cursed by the 4th, who, for reasons unclear, baked him a pie with tomatoes in it. He reportedly fled the region and never married. Was it the tomatoes? Or the fact that dating 3 sisters was a terrible idea? You be the judge. One household in Bavaria bans tomatoes outright. A tomato vine growing too close to the house is uprooted, chopped up, and burned, just in case. Just in case what, you ask? They never say. Just in case. It's hard to shake the sense that you're dangerous, even as more people start to accidentally eat you in cooked dishes. They still do it with hesitation. Maybe if they boil you, or roast you, or mash you with garlic, you'll be less likely to cast spells on their stomachs. You start appearing in medicinal recipes. Not food, mind you. Not meals. Tomato pulp for boils. Tomato juice for melancholy of the liver. Tomato slices on the forehead for headaches. You're still a curiosity, not a cuisine. And yet, something's changing. You, dear tomato, are becoming a regular guest at the edges of the European table, not on it, but near it. You're served to the dog or the servant or the guest no one likes, just to see what happens. Some survive, some even ask for more. But then one gets sick, say from bad fish or old bread, and the tomato takes the fall again. It's a cycle of curiosity and punishment, like trying to train a cat. There's a story in one Spanish town about a man who ate a tomato, claimed to have visions, and swore off cheese forever. He became a minor local celebrity and opened a tomato-free tavern. It didn't do well. People love cheese too much. All this trial and error adds up to something, though. You're no longer unknown. You're a known danger, which, weirdly, is progress. The most dangerous thing in this era is something no one understands. At least now people think they understand you. You're spicy, you're tricky. You might be edible under the right conditions, but you're also still, somehow, probably cursed. And yet, you remain stubbornly in the garden, growing, watching, waiting. You've made it to the aristocrat's table now, but only just. You're perched delicately beside roasted quail and wine-soaked pears, placed on a pewter plate that gleams in the candlelight. You look good, suspiciously good. And that's the problem. Because while everyone's marveling at your glossy red skin and curvy little shape, no one's thinking about chemistry. Not that 18th century Europeans had a strong grasp of it yet. But what they did know, vaguely, confusingly, is that eating you off certain dishes had consequences. Enter the pewter plate. See, pewter in those days wasn't exactly the classy upgrade you'd hope for. It often contained lead, lots of it. Now, when your acidic little tomato juice touches that lead-rich pewter surface, something unpleasant happens. A chemical reaction that leaches lead into the food. So imagine a well-to-do gentleman deciding to impress his guests. He cuts into you with a silver knife, spreads you daintily on a biscuit, lifts the bite to his mouth, and later that evening he gets very sick. Nausea, headache, maybe even death if he was already unwell. Did anyone say, maybe the plate's to blame? Nope. They said, it's that tomato. Historians still argue whether the pewter theory is the reason tomatoes earned their killer reputation, but it makes for a juicy explanation. Literally. The fruit wasn't the villain, the fancy dishware was. But try explaining that to someone whose cousin just collapsed face first into a tomato tart. This wasn't a one-time thing. The wealthy were the only ones who could afford to experiment with tomatoes in the first place. Because who else had imported New World plants, polished pewter, and a chef bold enough to chop one up? So as the tomato gets passed around at pot dinners, it leaves behind a trail of pale, shaking nobles and suspicious deaths. And suddenly, you're being blamed not just for indigestion, but murder. You're the perfect suspect, foreign, misunderstood, and flashy. Meanwhile, the peasants are off to the side, eyeing you cautiously. They don't eat off pewter. They use wood or clay. They're less affected. But since they listen to what the aristocrats say, they assume you must be cursed too. And so your reputation continues to rot even as you ripen. You might find yourself plopped in the middle of a table like a centerpiece, garnish, not food. People admire your color, your scent. Some touch you with one hesitant finger. But eat you? Absolutely not. That's for fools and foreigners. Still, some dare. One brave young cook in Venice slices you, stews you with garlic, onion, and a splash of vinegar. He tastes it, survives, feels fine, a little sweaty maybe, but that could be the heat. He doesn't tell anyone, not yet. Elsewhere, an apothecary argues tomatoes are good for digestion, cooked, not raw. He writes this in a letter, but someone else later publishes the letter with a disclaimer warning that the author died mysteriously. It was actually a cart accident. Still, the seed of fear grows. Some people even start testing you on animals. Dogs, goats, chickens. The results are mixed. Some animals love you, others sniff and walk away. One goose reportedly honked for 3 hours after eating a tomato, which locals took as a warning. Or possibly a declaration of war. There's even a tale of a traveling peddler who sells tomatoes as Spanish poison balls, used to kill rats and ex-lovers. He makes a decent profit before being arrested for something entirely unrelated involving a stolen pig and 3 forged coins. All these anecdotes pile up like overripe fruit. And you sit there through it all, blamed by scientists who don't fully understand acids, feared by nobles who don't understand their tableware, avoided by the poor who can't afford to find out the hard way. The truth is buried beneath centuries of bad luck and even worse cutlery. No one thinks to boil you. Not yet. No one realizes that maybe, just maybe, the problem isn't you. It's how you're served. You're too new, too different, too loud. You burst with juice in a culture that prefers things dry, cured, or pickled beyond recognition. Still, in some hidden corners, someone's grandmother is experimenting, mashing you into bread, stirring you into stew, maybe even sprinkling a little sea salt. And she doesn't die. In fact, she feels better. Her joints ache a little less. Her appetite returns. She even sings a little tune while stirring the pot, but no one listens to her. Not yet. You're still poison in the eyes of society. But a few mouths are starting to wonder, what if they were wrong? You've been through a lot for a fruit, or maybe a vegetable. No one can decide. Botanically, you're a fruit. Culinary-wise, you're, well, suspicious. And now, in the middle of the 18th century, just as your red little reputation is teetering between pariah and pantry guest, a new player enters the scene: the apothecaries. These are not your modern-day pharmacists with white coats and digital labels. These are robe-wearing, herb-sorting, scroll-reading potion merchants with wooden drawers full of odd-smelling powders and enough confidence to claim they can treat anything, from toothaches to heartbreak, with a tincture or poultice. And suddenly you, yes, you, the tomato, are thrust into this strange in-between world of folk medicine, half magic, and experimental cures. One apothecary in France begins boiling tomatoes down into a syrup he claims will soothe the liver. Another in rural Spain mixes tomato pulp with olive oil and rubs it on swollen knees. There's even a record, half legible, of someone trying to use mashed tomatoes as a compress for gout. Whether or not it worked, historians still argue. You become a kind of culinary scapegoat / hopeful cure. You're not eaten in the traditional sense, not yet, but you are applied, rubbed, dried, distilled. A tomato poultice becomes something of a trend in certain nervous circles. One enterprising apothecary writes that tomato seeds, when dried and ground, improve the flow of internal spirits. What does that mean? Nobody knows, but it sounds vaguely helpful. Of course, not everyone's on board. For every experimental healer rubbing tomato onto skin ailments, there's another standing behind the counter declaring tomatoes too warm in their nature and therefore dangerous for melancholic personalities. This is based on the old theory of humors, the idea that your health depends on balancing bodily fluids like blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Tomatoes, being red, juicy, and kind of spicy, are naturally filed under probably disruptive. So depending on which town you're in, you're either a remedy or a warning label, sometimes both. And it doesn't stop with medicine. As more people start noticing your richness, your color, your smell, you start turning up in love potions, or at least romantic attempts at such. Notably, the tomato's French nickname, pomme d'amour, love apple, gets taken a little too literally. In one small Italian village, a local herbalist gives courting couples a tomato-infused wine to warm the heart and loosen the tongue. In some areas of Provence, women hide small tomatoes under their pillows on Midsummer's Eve in hopes of dreaming of their future husbands. Whether this works is never recorded, but local priests aren't thrilled about the trend. You've become tangled in myth, mystery, and metaphysical speculation. The tomato is no longer just a strange New World curiosity. It's a folk object, a healer's hope, and occasionally a romantic crutch. Still, almost nobody is just cooking you. You're a treatment, not a treat. The problem is, these uses don't exactly build trust. When a thing is used to cure skin infections and also to enhance bedroom vitality, people assume it probably shouldn't be anywhere near their soup, at least not yet. The public remains wary. Too many conflicting opinions, too much uncertainty. Even botanists can't agree on what you really are. One calls you Solanum esculentum, another calls you Lycopersicum esculentum, and both of them kind of mumble about nightshades and poisons and curious vitality. You're still associated with the darker, more dangerous parts of the plant world. Belladonna, henbane, mandrake, all your neighbors in the family tree are, well, questionable. And if someone's cousin once saw a chicken faint near a tomato plant, that story gets passed around until it becomes legend. Don't let your hens near the love apples, someone warns. They'll stop laying eggs. No proof, no science, just sleepy hearsay. Meanwhile, tomatoes continue showing up in gardens. Always gardens, never markets. People grow you, admire you, even smell you. But eat you? Not unless they're feeling lucky. You become something of a gardening trophy, a showpiece, a conversation starter. The same way someone today might own a rare orchid or a bonsai tree. You're the look but don't taste member of the vegetable patch. One French noblewoman reportedly had entire rows of tomato plants in her estate gardens, flanked by lavender and basil. She never ate a single one, but she would walk among them and comment on their shine. You're the forbidden fruit with landscaping potential. And still, in small kitchens and out-of-the-way villages, something simmers, a stew, a sauce, a quick fry in olive oil. Someone's grandma, perhaps, is testing your limits, quietly, cautiously. They don't say anything. Not yet. But the flavor is promising. The seeds of change are there. Literally. Now you're in the hands of the scientists, or rather the early botanists, those half-wigged, monocle-polishing gentlemen scribbling in Latin by candlelight while surrounded by dried plants, pickled roots, and a pet hedgehog named Erasmus. You've been moved out of the garden and into the study, where your future depends entirely on whether someone classifies you as friend or foe. Unfortunately, you're guilty by association. You see, your botanical family is complicated. Tomatoes belong to the Solanaceae family, aka the nightshades. And that name alone is enough to raise eyebrows from Prague to Paris. You're closely related to belladonna, henbane, and even tobacco. Plants known for hallucinations, death, and, in some cases, mildly embarrassing poetry. So naturally, people begin to wonder, are you edible, or are you deadly in disguise? One naturalist argues you're a safe cousin of the nightshades, domesticated, tamed by farming. Another says, no, definitely dangerous, while holding a tomato on a fork like it's ticking. You just sit there, moist and misunderstood, wondering what it would take for someone to put you on a sandwich. Some early classification texts go back and forth, labeling you alternately as Solanum lycopersicum and Lycopersicum esculentum. Both names sound equally suspicious, like potions from a Hogwarts side hustle. The second name, esculentum, literally means edible, but many authors slap a big asterisk on it. Edible? Possibly, under circumstances that do not involve pewter. Historians still argue whether this cautious naming slowed your acceptance into European kitchens, but it certainly didn't help. If someone can't even decide what to call you, they're probably not ready to put you in a pie. Let's talk leaves for a moment. Your foliage does you no favors. Tomato leaves are hairy, pungent, and, truthfully, a little weird. They're distantly toxic and smell like something between mint, musk, and warning. In a world where people often judged plants by their leaves alone, your green bits gave off major "do not eat me" vibes. One British scholar in the 1700s claimed the smell of crushed tomato leaves could induce melancholy. Another theorized the leaves breathed corruption into the soil around them. Of course, that didn't stop him from drawing several lovely tomato sketches in his journal, which were later misattributed to his dog. Meanwhile, herbalists argue over whether tomato flowers, small, yellow, star-like, were spiritually hot or cold. Some believed they drained vitality. Others insisted they increased earthy energies. Again, the science. Not quite nailed down, but the vibes. Questionable. In classrooms and botanical lectures, tomatoes become case studies in confusion. Teachers point to them as examples of taxonomic uncertainty. Not everything that looks tasty is safe, they warn. Some things are both. Still, your defenders grow bolder. One Dutch gardener documents a peasant who eats tomatoes regularly and has not expired. Another records a rise in Italian recipes featuring stewed tomato pulp, often used as a disguise for lesser meats. Translation: it made goat taste less like goat. But despite mounting evidence that no one's actually dying from eating you, the fear lingers. That's the thing with superstition. It hangs on like the smell of old garlic. Even the skeptical minds of the Enlightenment era weren't immune. One French scientist wrote that while he believed tomatoes were safe in principle, he still wouldn't eat one raw unless in extremis. Which, to be clear, probably means while stranded on a boat, surrounded by sharks and already gnawing on his own hat. You're starting to earn a strange new reputation, the maybe food, not quite poison, not quite safe, in the same category as mushrooms you can't name or seafood that smells a bit too enthusiastic. But that limbo, unloved yet observed, is where progress simmers. A few brave botanists begin including you in their garden manuals. Tomato, an interesting New World addition, they write. Attractive in form, suspect in function, possibly culinary. That's like being told you're interesting looking on a dating app. Not exactly a glowing review, but it's better than sinful and deadly. You get some small wins. A curious chef, a daring gardener, a schoolboy who eats one on a dare and lives to tell the tale. And slowly you shift, from dangerous to debatable, from debated to decorative. And now you're teetering on the edge of something exciting. Acceptance. You can feel it, can't you? The world isn't quite ready to celebrate you, but they're starting to consider you, and sometimes that's all it takes. You're no longer just a curiosity. You've become a quiet gamble, a test of courage among chefs and garden folk. The tomato's fate begins to shift, not in the lecture halls or manor houses, but in the kitchens of Italy. Because if there's one place where suspicion can be melted by garlic, it's the Italian countryside. Here, cooks are less interested in nightshade theories and more concerned with flavor. They're stirring, roasting, simmering, testing you not in theory but in practice. The results? Surprisingly edible, sometimes delicious. It starts slow. You're added to stews, you're mashed into meats, you're spread over toasted bread with oil, and when no one collapses face down into the polenta, word spreads, not in books or pamphlets, but in kitchens, over wine and laughter, in secret family recipes and gossipy bakeries. Historians still argue whether Naples or Sicily embraced you first. But either way, southern Italy becomes your first true home, a culinary asylum where you're finally allowed to shine, not in fear, but in olive oil. And then, magic, someone puts you on pasta. Let that sink in. The red sauce, the simmer, the first accidental masterpiece. No one writes down the exact moment, of course. There's no royal decree or dramatic reveal. It's more like a shrug, a let's try this, and then a pause, a smile, a second bite. You, once accused of poisoning noblemen, are now dressing noodles. You, the devil's apple, are now being slurped by hungry teenagers and stern-faced grandmas. You've gone from feared to flavored. Now Italy isn't shouting your praises just yet. There's still skepticism in the north, still frowns from the bishops, but in the warm kitchens of the south, with their herbs and frying pans and garlic-stained cutting boards, you're home. The transformation begins to travel. Tomato sauces migrate north, then east. They cross borders hidden inside bread rolls and soup pots. Italian immigrants carry tomato recipes with them, secret weapons wrapped in wax paper and twine. Meanwhile, in England and France, the elite are perplexed. They hear rumors of this strange new sauce, red, tangy, and allegedly delicious. They don't quite trust it, but they do trust Italians when it comes to food. So you sneak into menus, carefully, in the corners. A tomato relish here, a sauce in the Italian style there. The diners raise eyebrows, they taste, they pause, and they don't keel over. One nobleman in London writes in his journal, "Tasted a red sauce over beef today. Foreign, slightly sour, not unpleasant. Survived." A glowing review, all things considered. By the late 1700s, recipes begin appearing in cookbooks. Actual cookbooks. Written by actual chefs who aren't worried about curses. One such book includes tomatoes stewed with onions and cloves. Another recommends adding tomato paste to gravy for meats of strong odor. A backhanded compliment, but progress nonetheless. Still, you're not mainstream. In fact, you're still mostly considered ethnic. Foreign food, Italian food, something adventurous uncles order on holiday, but you've entered the public palate. And once a food finds its flavor, it's hard to stop. One tavern in Marseille begins serving bread topped with crushed tomato, garlic, and herbs. Proto-bruschetta, basically. It becomes a local favorite, despite several old women insisting it smells too cheerful. The soldiers return from campaigns in Italy raving about red paste for bread. They try to explain it to their wives. The wives squint, try it, and promptly claim it was their idea all along. Even the skeptics start giving in. A priest in Avignon, who once preached against tomatoes, is caught growing 6 vines in his garden. For medicinal reasons, he insists, while licking his fingers. And in the New World? Oh, in the Americas, you're thriving. While Europe hesitates, the colonies have already embraced you. Tomatoes grow easily in the soil of the southern United States. Farmers find them resilient, home cooks find them tangy, children find them hilarious to throw at bad plays. In Virginia, Thomas Jefferson grows tomatoes at Monticello and writes about them with the excitement of someone who's just discovered jazz. Delightful plant, he notes, must be consumed quickly, better with pepper. By now the tables are turning, not all at once, but slowly, steadily. You, once a symbol of exotic danger, are now the silent champion of sauces, the hero of the humble cook, the backbone of the peasant plate. You've made it into soups, stews, spreads, and secrets. You're in. Your rise isn't explosive. It's more like a slow simmer, fitting really. Because while revolutions rage across Europe and monarchs lose their heads, you, dear tomato, are gently bubbling away on stovetops, transforming yourself from feared poison to pantry staple. The public's palate is evolving. Taste is becoming adventurous. And as trade routes expand and cookbooks multiply, people are growing more curious and less terrified of food with a little color, a little acid, a little kick. That's your cue. But let's be clear, you're not front-page news yet. In England and Northern Europe, you're still considered niche. People call you exotic, saucy, even vulgar. A tomato on the plate is like a bright red hat at a funeral. Some people admire the confidence, but most just think it's too much. Still, the tide is shifting. Even the British, with their historic fear of seasoning and suspicion of vegetables that aren't beige, start experimenting with you. One of your early champions in the English-speaking world is a man named Philip Miller, a botanist who ran the Chelsea Physic Garden in London. Miller publishes a guide for gardeners that dares to treat the tomato like a legitimate food plant, not a witch's berry. His work doesn't cause an overnight transformation, but it gives you some long overdue legitimacy. People start growing you not just for show, but for eating, quietly, carefully, often behind closed kitchen doors. And in the American colonies, you're practically a celebrity. Down in the warm soil of Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia, you flourish. You're fast-growing, sun-loving, and surprisingly adaptable. Farmers love how little attention you require, cooks love your versatility, and Americans, already developing a taste for bold, homegrown flavor, adopt you without the centuries of European baggage. You're no longer the poison apple. You're now a proper ingredient. One particularly tomato-crazed gentleman is Thomas Jefferson, that Enlightenment-loving founding father who's equal parts farmer, philosopher, and foodie. He grows tomatoes at Monticello and serves them at his famously elaborate dinners, not as decoration, not as novelty, but as real food. In his writings, he refers to you as love apples and notes their fine flavor. It's possible he was trying to impress guests, or maybe he just enjoyed watching European diplomats squirm when they saw something red and juicy on the plate. Either way, Jefferson gave you the PR boost you desperately needed. Back in Europe, rumors begin to swirl. The Americans are eating tomatoes, and they're fine. Historians still debate whether Jefferson's tomato enthusiasm directly influenced your European redemption arc. Some say yes. Others argue your survival was more due to colonial cookbooks, which began including you in meat pies and stews by the early 1800s. And then, quietly, you creep into print media. Recipes, household tips, agricultural manuals, all now mention tomatoes as something you can grow and eat. A century ago, these same texts would have filed you under decorative, possibly cursed. Now you're being measured in cups and pinches, your seeds sold in paper packets, your flesh sliced into sandwiches. You've become normal. Of course, not everyone is on board. There are still tomato skeptics, those who wrinkle their noses, whisper about nightshades, and insist tomatoes inflame the blood. You're still blamed for the occasional stomach upset or vivid dream. But now, the burden of proof is on the accuser. You've earned the benefit of the doubt. In parts of Germany, tomatoes are now called Paradiser or paradise apples. Quite the upgrade from poison berries, wouldn't you say? In France, they're pomme d'amour, still clinging to that romantic flair. And in Spain, well, they're already being chopped and mixed into gazpacho, a refreshing slap of tomato pride. You're not just accepted, you're becoming loved. But your redemption isn't merely about taste, it's about timing. This is the age of preservation. People are learning to bottle, pickle, and store food for winter. And guess what? You reduce beautifully. Your acidic nature makes you ideal for canning. You simmer into sauces, you hold your color, you taste better the longer you cook. Suddenly, you're practical. You're no longer just the risky dare of the dinner table. You're an asset to home cooks, soldiers, and sailors alike, your nourishment that lasts. You've gone from curse to commodity. And so, in kitchens from New York to Naples, you now sit proudly in bowls, jars, and bubbling pots. Where once your name caused a nervous laugh or a whispered warning, now it brings thoughts of warmth, comfort, and maybe just a little leftover bread to wipe the plate clean. You've arrived. But oh, your journey's not over yet, because once you're in the pantry, you're ready for the factory. You've gone from whispered warnings to whispered recipes, but now something bigger is coming. Industrialization. That's right, your quiet simmer in household pots is about to become a roaring boil in steel kettles the size of carriages. You're stepping into the age of mass production. It starts with a problem. Food doesn't last. Meat spoils, milk turns, bread dries out. But tomatoes, tomatoes can be tamed. When stewed down, your acidic nature actually helps preserve you. You don't rot, you reduce. Simmer you long enough, seal you in glass or tin, and you stay shelf-stable for months. This is a revolution, and you, yes, you, tomato, are at the heart of it. Historians still argue whether it was the French or the Americans who first perfected tomato canning, but most agree that by the early 19th century, your sticky red goodness is being sealed in jars and tins faster than anyone can say lycopene. Factories spring up, some small, some sprawling. In New Jersey, a man named Joseph Campbell starts experimenting with condensed soups. He'll soon found a company that will turn your humble pulp into an international icon. You may have heard of him. And over in Italy, Francesco Cirio begins bottling peeled tomatoes in Naples in the 1850s. He exports them across Europe, making your flavor a staple in both aristocratic kitchens and humble homes. Cirio becomes one of the first to realize your true potential, not just as a fresh ingredient, but as a product. You're on grocery shelves, you're in cookbooks, you're on billboards. You are everywhere. But mass production isn't just about convenience, it's about war. Soldiers need food that won't spoil on the battlefield. They need calories, flavor, and variety. You become a go-to ration. Tinned tomatoes, tomato soup, tomato paste. You're stuffed into the knapsacks of armies across continents. In the American Civil War, Union soldiers received canned tomatoes as part of their rations. Some love them. Others complain that the cans explode. It's fine, you're still getting eaten. You're even credited, somewhat dramatically, with preventing scurvy among the troops. Is it true? Not exactly, but you're vitamin-rich, and in an era where citrus isn't always available, you become a tangy stand-in. And let's not forget ketchup. No, not the overly sweet stuff in plastic bottles, yet. But in the early days, ketchup is more like a spicy, savory preserve. And while the British originally made it from mushrooms and anchovies, the Americans have a better idea. Tomatoes. In 1876, a company called Heinz introduces a standardized tomato ketchup recipe. Safe, tasty, shelf-stable. Their clever marketing convinces a suspicious public that this tomato product is safe, scientific, and maybe even patriotic. Ketchup soon becomes a staple condiment in America. You go from folk cure to hot dog companion in under 100 years. Not bad for a fruit that once caused fainting spells in French courtyards. Meanwhile, chefs embrace you with abandon. You appear in pizzas, pastas, curries, shakshuka, stews and chutneys. You're sliced raw, roasted, sun-dried, fried green, and even served upside down on tarts. Every culture you touch adds something to your legend. In Russia, you're turned into spicy ajika. In Morocco, you simmer in tagines. In India, you're blended with spices until you're practically unrecognizable, but still irreplaceable. And in the United States, you're no longer foreign. You're homegrown. You're grown in California's Central Valley by the acre, trucked across highways, dropped into blenders, and blasted into cans at 60 miles an hour. Tomatoes are now a commodity. No longer the garden's mystery, they're a fixture of everyday life. But not everyone is thrilled. There are holdouts, food snobs, traditionalists, people who insist that tomatoes are overused, too bold, too messy. A true sauce needs butter, they whisper, not acid. But their voices are quieted beneath the boiling sound of Sunday gravies and backyard barbecue ketchup squirts. You've become unignorable. And yet, despite your domination, you've kept a strange little superstition around you. That whisper of danger, that distant memory of pewter plates and poisoned dinner guests. It doesn't hurt your image, it helps it. Because now, you're not just food, you're mystique in a can. The once feared fruit has become the backbone of modern cuisine. And still you remain humble, hanging on a vine, ripening in the sun, waiting to be plucked, stirred, sliced, and celebrated. So now you're global. You've survived aristocratic paranoia, pewter poisoning, botanical mislabeling, and centuries of side-eye. You're canned, sauced, sliced, and slathered. You've got a passport stamped in every cuisine: Italian, Indian, Middle Eastern, Latin American. But here's the fun part: your story isn't done evolving. Not by a long shot. Because just as you become a beloved fixture on dinner tables, something curious starts happening in the 20th century. People try to make you better. Enter the age of tomato engineering. It begins innocently enough. Farmers want you to be bigger, redder, hardier. Shoppers love the look of a perfect tomato, smooth and symmetrical like a wax sculpture. Grocers want you to survive truck rides, jostling, stacking, storage. So breeders start tweaking. You're crossbred for durability. You get thicker skin, firmer flesh, a longer shelf life. All good things. In theory. But with every adjustment, something starts to slip. Something intangible. Flavor. Yes. You, the once controversial taste bomb, the zingy punch of summer, are slowly losing your zest. Scientists start noticing that the supermarket tomato tastes kind of like wet cardboard, bland, mealy, deceptively red but emotionally beige. It's not your fault. You didn't choose this life, but the push for perfect appearance has sacrificed your soul. Historians still argue whether this flavor loss was deliberate or accidental. Some blame the mass market model. Others point to a specific gene, one that breeders unknowingly suppressed in the quest for consistent color. It's called GLK2, and it turns out it's partially responsible for your sweetness and smell. Oops. But all is not lost, because just as the public begins to complain, why don't tomatoes taste like they used to? A counter-movement begins. Call it the heirloom revival. People start planting older varieties, Brandywines, Cherokee Purples, San Marzanos. These tomatoes are lumpy, weirdly shaped, and sometimes striped like a circus tent. But oh, the flavor. You're juicy again, you're unpredictable, you're alive. Farmers markets boom, backyard gardening makes a comeback. Suddenly, everyone wants a tomato that tastes like a tomato again. And your story loops back on itself. Because once again, people are encountering the real you. The messy, tangy, slightly explosive fruit that once scared aristocrats to death. And now, they can't get enough. Meanwhile, in the culinary world, you've reached legendary status. Chefs debate your raw versus roasted flavor profiles. Entire cookbooks are dedicated to tomato sauces. You've got festivals in your honor, literal ones. In Spain, the town of Bunal hosts the annual La Tomatina, a tomato-throwing frenzy where 20,000 people pelt each other with ripe tomatoes just for fun. Yes, you were once a feared poison. Now you're flung gleefully through the air by laughing strangers. One chef calls you the meat of the garden. Another calls you the diva of summer. You're tossed in caprese salads, layered in ratatouille, and blended into gazpacho so smooth it feels like drinking velvet. In Japan, you're even eaten as dessert. That's right, sweet tomato jelly, tomato ice cream, tomato soda. Historians don't argue over whether that's delicious. They just quietly step away. And you've even entered space. NASA has experimented with growing you on the International Space Station. That's right, you're weightless now, floating in orbit beside powdered eggs and freeze-dried beans, being studied for how you grow in microgravity. Not bad for a fruit once accused of killing dukes. And in pop culture, you're not just food, you're metaphor. You symbolize ripeness, romance, danger, even rebellion. You've starred in children's books, indie films, and low-budget horror flicks. Looking at you, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes. You're on lunchboxes and t-shirts, you're a joke and a delicacy. And through it all, you remain shockingly yourself. Still red, still juicy, still weird. Because underneath the factory shine and the heirloom resurgence and the scientific dissection, you are and always will be a tomato. Mysterious, mildly magical, and just a little bit mischievous. By now you've shed your sinister reputation. You've gone from fringe curiosity to culinary royalty, from misunderstood outsider to garden MVP. But let's not forget, you've always been more than just food. You're also symbolism, your metaphor, your personality in produce form. Let's rewind for a moment, not to your dangerous debut, but to your cultural evolution. Because as you gained flavor in kitchens, you also gained meaning in minds. Writers, painters, filmmakers, and politicians, everyone seemed to have something to say about you. Take color, for instance. Red has never been neutral. Red is passion, anger, power, blood, revolution. So when you, a tomato, explode onto the European food scene with your aggressive hue, you weren't just a taste sensation, you were a statement. By the 19th century, people are using you to represent boldness. To throw tomatoes, becomes the public's favorite form of heckling. It's theatrical, it's messy, it's deeply satisfying. One actor in London's West End is said to have dodged a tomato mid-monologue by turning it into part of his sword fight. It brought the house down. The tomato, already famous in the kitchen, had now become a comedic weapon. Historians still argue whether throwing tomatoes began as protest or performance. But one thing is clear. Once you hit a bad singer square in the teeth, there's no going back. And then there's your political side. In early socialist posters, you're depicted as the fruit of the working class, juicy, affordable, nourishing, a red badge of resilience. In wartime propaganda, you're shown in victory gardens, feeding families, supporting troops. You become an emblem of resourcefulness, the fruit that keeps on giving. But as the 20th century rolls on, you get pulled in stranger directions. You appear in Warhol prints, in surrealist paintings, in absurdist comedies. You are both high art and fast food. Haute cuisine and ketchup packet, you contain multitudes. Let's not forget your journey into language. You're blushing like a tomato. She's a hot tomato. That's a rotten tomato. You become a shorthand for attraction, heat, scandal, and judgment. Not bad for a fruit that once had trouble getting past the garden gate. Meanwhile, in the culinary world, your versatility continues to inspire awe. You're sweet but not sugary, acidic but not sour, soft but not mushy. You're the great balancer, bridging the gap between boring and bold, bland and brilliant. A tomato can lift a sauce, deepen a stew, and rescue a sandwich from mediocrity with just one slice. You're not just cooked, you're transformed, slow roasted with garlic and thyme until you're almost candy. Sun-dried into wrinkled strips of concentrated sunshine, blended into soups so smooth they whisper. You even inspire rituals. Think of the perfect bite of bruschetta, the way the juice drips through toasted bread, the slick of olive oil catching the light, the little sigh that follows. That's not just eating, that's ceremony. And then modern science circles back. After decades of breeding you for looks, researchers begin studying how to get your flavor back. Geneticists identify over 30 compounds that give tomatoes their unique taste. Sweetness, tang, aroma, all dance together in complex harmony. It turns out the best-tasting tomatoes aren't necessarily the reddest or the biggest. They're the ones with the right balance of sugars, acids, and volatile compounds. You're not just food, you're chemistry. You're not just chemistry, you're memory. Because almost everyone has a tomato story. Maybe it's the smell of your vines on a summer day, or the sharp tang of your juice on a white shirt. Maybe it's grandma's sauce bubbling on the stove, or that one time someone made you try tomato ice cream and you still haven't forgiven them. Your nostalgia, hidden in a seed. Your summer in a slice. And for something that was once feared, misnamed, misjudged, and misunderstood, that's a pretty good glow-up. Let's take a moment, shall we? You've traveled continents, tangled with aristocrats, danced through scientific debate, and ended up as both comfort food and cultural icon. But your journey isn't just out there in the world, it's also inside the quiet corners of people's lives. Because whether you're sliced into sandwiches in a crowded deli, simmering in a pot on a rainy Tuesday, or being pureed into the world's gentlest tomato bisque, you're present for the small stuff, and the small stuff matters. You've become a symbol of home, not necessarily where someone's from, but where they feel fed, safe, and maybe just a little sleepy. Let's zoom in. A child sits at a dinner table, arms crossed, staring at a single wobbling slice of tomato on their plate. A grandparent insists, "It'll make you strong." The child takes a bite. They don't die. This is a win for everyone. Elsewhere, someone pulls out a wrinkled recipe card from the 1950s, stained with thyme and sauce. It calls for canned tomatoes, crushed by hand with a note, "Add love, not too much salt." No one remembers who wrote it, but they follow the instructions anyway. The kitchen fills with the same smell it did 60 years ago. You are continuity. A gardener, years into retirement, finds joy in nurturing a single tomato vine on the balcony. Every morning, she checks for new blossoms like they're postcards from a dear friend. When the first tomato reddens, she claps like it's a miracle. Because it is. You are ritual. And in restaurants, you perform under pressure. In Michelin-starred kitchens, chefs hold their breath as they slice you, searching for the perfect balance of flesh and juice. One wrong tomato can ruin a dish. One right one can make someone cry, and they won't even know why. Because taste is memory. And you, little tomato, are surprisingly emotional. Historians still argue whether food can carry collective memory, but anyone who's smelled a pot of tomato sauce after a long day knows the answer. You don't just nourish, you remind. Remind people of who they were, who they sat with, who they've lost, and who they might be becoming. You've also proven to be weirdly funny. A tomato is the punchline of many jokes. It's thrown in cartoons, splattered in slapstick, and turned into dozens of puns. I'm ripe for the picking. You say tomato, I say. You know the rest. You're not offended. If anything, you've leaned into it. You're not like the fancy avocado, always trying to be an influencer, or the mysterious fig, begging to be misunderstood. You're the tomato. You don't need to try hard. You show up. And even in moments of conflict, you unite. Political rallies have been interrupted by flying tomatoes. That's true, but tomato soup has been handed out during protests too. Hot, filling, shared in cold streets under cloudy skies. You're part of resistance and relief. And then there's the quietest role you play: care. Nurses have fed you to patients in recovery. Parents have hidden you in sauces so picky eaters get their vitamins. Partners have perfected pasta recipes just to impress someone they love. No one writes headlines about that kind of thing. But that's where you shine. Not in the drama, not in the spectacle, but in the soft places, the simmering pots, the clink of spoons, the second helpings, the whispered, "This tastes just like I remember." You've gone from terrifying curiosity to timeless comfort. You've survived centuries of skepticism and emerged not just edible, but essential. Not just delicious, but dependable. And if that isn't the dream, what is? By now, your story has reached the kind of quiet triumph that most foods only dream of. But even in this victory lap, you're still evolving. Still shaping culture, still surprising scientists, still playing the long game. Because if there's one thing the tomato teaches, it's that patience pays off. Let's talk nutrition. You've always had a little something special under the surface, something that made ancient people think you were magic, and that modern people put in smoothies and skincare products. Lycopene. Lycopene is the antioxidant that gives you that vibrant red hue, and it's become the darling of nutritional science. Studies show it may help protect against heart disease, certain cancers, and sun damage. The best part? Cooking boosts its potency. The more you simmer, the more your powers grow. In a world obsessed with superfoods, you didn't even have to rebrand. You were already packed with vitamins A and C, potassium, and all the feel-good, immune-boosting, free radical-fighting jazz a modern eater could ask for. You're the health nut's favorite fruit, disguised as comfort food. And your global influence? Still spreading. In China, you're beloved in stir-fries and egg dishes. In West Africa, you're a base for jollof rice. In Mexico, you go far beyond salsa, making appearances in tamales, stews, and tortas. And in Philippine cuisine, you add tang to sinigang and brightness to local dishes that stretch back centuries. Tomatoes don't just adapt to new cuisines, they elevate them. Historians still argue whether any other ingredient has woven itself into so many cultures, in so many ways. Some say rice, others say salt. But the tomato's done it with flair. You've become a quiet form of diplomacy, a shared love across borders. People might disagree on politics, religion, or pineapple on pizza, but almost everyone agrees. Tomatoes belong. In sauces, yes. In sandwiches, sure. Even in places that once seemed odd, like Bloody Marys, savory popsicles, or yes, tomato-based cakes. That one is still controversial. But you endure. Because while trends rise and fall, you've become a default, a given, no longer questioned, but counted on. In that way, you're like language, like sunlight, like home. And what's more, you're accessible. Fancy truffle oil or saffron threads may be prized, but you, tomato, are for everyone, rich or poor, old or young, urban or rural. You don't require special training to grow. You don't demand rare soil or elite tools. You just need sunlight, water, and someone who believes in you. And when you're ripe, you give back tenfold. It's no wonder gardeners love you so much. You're the gateway crop, the plant that teaches patience, reward, and the sheer joy of picking something red and warm from your own backyard. One gardener in Ohio once described his tomatoes as little victories. Another in Kenya called them sun coins. And somewhere in a school project or community plot, a child holds up their first tomato like it's a trophy. It is. You, tomato, are proof that the smallest, most ordinary things can become extraordinary with time. And while you no longer need to fight for respect, you continue to earn it. One slice at a time. One sauce, one soup, one sleepy evening dinner where no one's talking much. But the food is warm and the lights are soft. Because even when no one's thinking about you, you're still there. On the plate, in the air, in the story. Let's drift now, not forward but inward. Because while the tomato's story is global, expansive, and full of drama, it's also deeply personal. A kind of quiet companion in the background of life's softest moments. You don't always notice it. That's the trick. But look closely and you'll see. The tomato is always nearby. When someone moves into their first apartment and tries cooking from scratch, you're there. Chopped in 2 large cubes, thrown into a wobbly first attempt at pasta. When they taste the sauce and realize this actually isn't bad, you're the reason. You were there when Grandma handed over her spaghetti recipe, swearing by only crushed San Marzanos from the blue can. And you were also there when someone ignored that advice, used diced tomatoes, and still found it delicious anyway. You're adaptable, forgiving, generous, and sometimes strangely emotional. A tomato sandwich can taste like summer break. A slice on a burger can remind someone of their dad at the grill. A can of tomato soup with a grilled cheese beside it can wrap around a person like a blanket when the world is just too much. Historians still argue whether foods can carry stories, but people who have ever eaten their feelings know better. Even in the way you smell, your memory incarnate. That strange green tomato vine scent from a freshly picked stem. It's earthy and sharp and oddly comforting, like holding a moment that doesn't quite have words. You're a fruit that grows like a weed but tastes like poetry. And your story, it doesn't really end, it just rests, simmering quietly in someone's kitchen. There's always someone discovering you for the first time, a child reaching into the garden, a college student opening a dusty cookbook, a sleepy listener, maybe just like you, lying in bed right now, drifting through this story, smiling at the thought of a fruit that used to cause panic in palaces and now comforts people on paper plates. Because somehow, through centuries of misunderstanding and makeover, you've become the most familiar flavor in the world. And yet, you're never boring. You're humble, but iconic. You're simple, but layered. You're red, but never just one shade. You've been mistaken, feared, thrown, bottled, adored, engineered, rejected, celebrated, smeared on stage performers and royal platters alike, and still you persist. And maybe that's why people love you. Because you remind them, softly, wordlessly, that it's okay to be misunderstood at first, that it's okay to start slow, that it's okay to take time becoming who you're meant to be. So go ahead, rest easy, little tomato. You've earned it. So now here you are. Not in a royal garden, not in a powdered wig dinner party, not in a suspicious old cookbook, mislabeled as a love apple. No, you're here, in a fridge drawer, a sandwich, a slow-cooked sauce. You're not exotic anymore, or feared, or misunderstood. You're trusted. Isn't that funny? You were once thought to be deadly, now you're comfort itself. You've sat on silver platters and school lunch trays. You've been thrown in protest and served in peace. You've seen empires rise and fall, and somehow you've ended up in everyone's pantry. But let's pause a moment. Because your story doesn't end with fame, or mass production, or even nutrition. No, your story settles somewhere quieter, between taste and memory. A tomato is never just a tomato. It's the smell of warm vines in summer. It's the tangy bite in the first forkful of spaghetti. It's the slow, lazy meal on a Sunday when there's nothing to do but let the sauce cook. It's a mother's lunchbox note, a grandmother's stained apron, a backyard harvest, a diner's grilled cheese special. You are present. You remind people they're still human. And in a world that moves faster every day, where everything is digital and distant and disposable, you remain earthy, tangible, real. You come from dirt, from sunlight, from rain that makes your skin split when there's too much of it, and heat that ripens you just in time. Historians still argue whether modern society has lost touch with food's origins. But you quietly keep that thread alive. Even if you come from a can, even if you're just a squeeze of ketchup on a paper plate, you're still real. And every time someone peels your skin, salts your flesh, slices you open to reveal that messy constellation of seeds inside, you offer a small reminder: not everything has to be perfect to be beautiful. That's your final lesson. You don't need to be shiny or symmetrical. You don't need to be fussed over or staged under perfect lighting. You just need to show up. To be honest. To be enough. And maybe that's why people keep planting you. Season after season. Because you're more than food. You're a little red reminder that time, care, and a touch of sunlight can turn even the most unlikely thing, once feared, once misunderstood, into something beloved. So now we slow things down. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes get heavy. Let the last traces of this little red fruit's long, winding journey settle softly in your mind. You're no longer in a European court or colonial garden. You're tucked into bed, listening to the whisper of history, the rustle of leaves outside your window, the gentle hum of quiet things. Imagine a garden at dusk, a single tomato vine swaying in the warm evening breeze. Its leaves smell like green tea and sunshine. One ripe tomato, round and glowing, catches the fading light, deep red, not loud, just content. Maybe it took centuries to get here. Maybe it took fear, confusion, and a lot of bad press. But now it just exists, soft, sweet, whole. And you? You're like that too. A little weathered, a little wiser, nothing flashy, but quietly growing, season after season, into someone worth knowing. So rest easy now. Let the warmth of kitchens and gardens and soft tomato sauce lull you. Let the story blur into sleep. Let yourself soften like a tomato in the sun. No rush, no worry, no fear. You're safe, you're home. And just like our friend the tomato, you've come a long way. Good night. Sweet dreams.